Quick stream here. Wanted to talk about some of the stuff going on. There was a Democracy Now! Video that I watched regarding Palestine, the West Bank, and the commentary regarding exactly how the Palestinians are being treated by the IDF that's coming in there, and the offensive strikes. And it just seems like we're not hearing as much about Ukraine anymore, so much so that everything is being shifted towards this Israeli-Gaza conflict. And it seems like everything is a complete disaster there, and it's almost following along this historical, almost predictive path where World War III, or this sort of end times war, is supposed to... I'm not in the right position for the mic here. Let me just get this correct. There we go. It's almost in a situation where we're seeing war in Israel, which is a sign of something very, very bad predicted thousands of years before in the future, of course, in Revelation. And we're seeing where Palestine is being wiped out. And that's not, again, to lessen what happened to Israel when Hamas came in on paragliders or whatever and invaded. It's not. It's bad for both sides. And I'm not trying to pick one side over the other. But there's been a lot more, I think, sympathy for the current event where the especially the Democrats are really supporting Palestine. And I just wanted to... There's a lot of Christians, there's a lot of Muslims in Palestine. Of course, there's other ethnic peoples there as well. But especially with the holiday season, with Hanukkah, with Christmas, and everything kind of converging here, I wanted to play this Democracy Now! Video quickly, 15 or 20 minute stream here, and then maybe play this other video I have. So let's play this.
Specifically defined in international law, and it's also a crime that has elements. Once these elements are met, the crime is committed. And as you know, this is a term that has not been used a lot before in the context of Palestine, although the crime, we believe, it has.
So this guy is an attorney. He's calling for international prosecutors to show up and start prosecuting war crimes on behalf of Gaza.
Been committed. So, for example, it happened in 1948. Many would argue, and I agree, was an act of genocide. The only reason we didn't call it genocide then, that we didn't have the concept of genocide had crystallized yet. We didn't have the Genocide Convention. We didn't have the definition. It was also used in the context of Palestine in the Sabra and Shatila massacre. And this is the only time that the UN described the situation as genocide. Genocide in international
Everything will be blocked by Israel, regardless.
law is a crime, and it's defined when there is certain underlying acts are being committed with the special intent to destroy in whole or in part a certain ethnic or religious or political group. And in this case, we believe the situation in Gaza is that of genocide.
The thing that really draws a lot of sympathy, and you see this a lot on Twitter or X, and you see these videos and you're kind of forced to watch them because once they start, you feel like you have a moral obligation to see exactly what's going on. And it's the hospital videos of these kids being brought in, where they're injured, and it is just heart-wrenching.
Usually in genocide, the hardest thing to prove is the mental element and the special intent to commit genocide. And in order to prove that, courts usually recourse to statements of the perpetrators. In this particular situation, we have numerous statements of genocidal intent that are also being translated into actions on the ground. We see the level of destruction, the disregard of human life, in the words of Biden, the indiscriminate bombing of civilians. And this is not only our conclusion as Palestinian human rights organizations. As a matter of fact,
wasn't there like a UN resolution a couple days ago, Thursday or Friday, where the United States refused to vote or something because the UN failed to condemn Hamas for starting this? And this is where this false flag thing kind of comes in, because this never would have started if Hamas wouldn't have initiated the whole thing. And it wouldn't have started if the if the Israeli Defense Forces wouldn't have kind of taunted Hamas into actually doing this, in that they stood down and they decreased the intensity of the response.
800 genocide and Holocaust scholars have also described the situation as genocide, and certain scholars describe it as a textbook case of genocide.
Now, Ahmed Abou-Foul, if you can talk personally about Gaza, about your homeland. You grew up in Gaza or were born in Gaza. In fact, your name, Ahmed Abou-Foul, didn't someone in your family by that same name just die?
Well,
it's because they all have the same name.
Over 60 of my family have died, including have been killed, to be accurate, including my eldest uncle, some of my cousins. And like most Palestinians, we don't feel like we even have the luxury to grieve. I'm considering the level of destruction and the horrific crimes that are being committed. It's really heartbreaking. We've always grew up to hear the stories of the Nakba. We've never imagined that we would live it. It happened in 1948 because it wasn't televised. The world didn't know what's going on in Palestine. But now it's quite disgraceful that it's a televised carnage, and the world is literally watching. You mentioned the Security Council resolution that was watered down and will be voted on today, but if you look at this situation and if you look at the voting record, it's basically the U.S. versus the world. The U.S. is actually promoting this genocide, supporting this genocide. I would never know.
Okay, so he's in New York right now and he's making these statements. So he's effectively attacking the country that he resides in. I'm assuming that he either has a green card or maybe he's even a citizen. I find that pretty rude and irresponsible. But I do agree. Obviously, the U.S. is providing weapons, funds, and everything else, and but otherwise, Israel would implode. It wouldn't have the resources. It wouldn't have the fighting force. It wouldn't have the ability to defend itself.
Most probably, my family was killed by American weapons. Our children are being
and everyone knows that if Israel didn't have that support, it would be crushed.
Torn apart on TV, on your TV screens, by American tax money, by the support of the American government. The American government is complicit in this genocide. There is blood of Palestinian children on their hands, and that's...
Well, why isn't he in Palestine then? Fighting. Not militarily fighting. I'm talking about just, offering aid or whatever he can do, documenting stuff.
Why with our partners in the U.S., with the Center for Constitutional Rights, and I know you interviewed Katie Gallagher, who spoke more about this, but we're suing Biden and President Biden, but also Secretary of State's Blinken.
Those lawsuits will go nowhere.
And Secretary of Defense Austin, not only for their complicity in genocide, but also for the failure to prevent genocide. If there's any country in
he's clearly low IQ. It's going to backfire against him because they're going to kick him out of the country. And it's going to have no movement whatsoever in terms of moving the needle in any direction that he wants it to move. If he wants to sue anyone, you would think that he would look at other ways, and I don't know those ways, but I'm just theorizing in the moment that suing the president and suing the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, is not going to do anything positive whatsoever in his movement other than documenting everything that's going on. But we have plenty of documentation with social media, this interview. Everybody has sympathy for what's going on with respect to the innocent in Palestine. The non-military aged men who are fighting, the families, obviously the children, as they do the same sympathy for the hostages that have been taken by Hamas. And there's this backlash in the US too, where you have those kidnap posters up everywhere and they're being taken down. They're being taken down in Minneapolis. That pisses me off almost more on a personal level because it's an attack on this country and it's an attack on our constitutional rights.
In the world that can influence Israeli policies is the U.S. And if you allow me, I mentioned that I come from a refugee family, so I'm not originally from Gaza. Like over 75% of the population in Gaza are refugees. So when we say this is a second Nakba, it is a second Nakba. In 1948,
I don't know what Nakba means. I wish that he would explain that for non-Muslim audiences.
over 80% of the Palestinian population were forcibly displaced. Now we have over 90% of the population that.
Wait, so this is really weird though, because this lower third says that he's a Gaza-born attorney, yet he says he's not from Gaza. So very confusing.
Is displaced. We have over 60% of Gaza's residential units have been destroyed. Most of the population are on the edge of starvation. It's quite shameful, to be honest, that until this very moment, the U.S. cannot do the bare minimum of human decency, which is called.
Why doesn't he mention the hostages taken, though, by Hamas? That's the other thing that really pisses me off in this whole thing, is that everybody's so one-sided. Why doesn't he state that he has some sympathy and that he has done something to try and maybe return those hostages back to Israel?
Calling for a ceasefire and trying to provide diplomatic coverage for the genocide that is unfolding in Gaza.
So can you account for, on the one hand, you have President Biden warning Israel about indiscriminate bombing, and on the other hand, you have the U.S. dragging its feet all week. Yesterday, we thought right after the show, I think.
What do you mean dragging its feet? They should be sending SEAL teams in there to get those hostages back. They should be sending special forces from the IDF in there. And of course they are from the IDF perspective, but we should be sending, Army Rangers in there as well.
I think 10 a.m. they were going to be voting. But now it is Friday. 4 times this vote has been delayed. A resolution that will clearly not be for a ceasefire. Can you explain the significance of what difference does a UN Security Council resolution even make? Is it binding? What would it mean? And what it has been watered down to at this point today?
Of course. Well, the Security Council resolutions are binding, although Israel has a history of not respecting those resolutions. The U.S. has been trying to water down the language not to include clear call for an immediate ceasefire. In the same time, they call for safe and unhindered humanitarian supplies and humanitarian aid, but at the same time they don't call for a ceasefire. And quite strange formula from the U.S. on the one hand to want safe and unhindered humanitarian access, but without stopping the fire. So basically, it wants humanitarian aid workers to work under the hell that Israel unleashed on the Palestinian civilian population. And as you mentioned, Biden didn't only warn the Israelis, he actually made a determination, and we agree with him. He said Israel is engaged in indiscriminate bombing. This is a war crime. So the question is, why do you then send weapons to Israel? The position of the US is quite hypocritical, and the US cannot claim leadership in the world because it's not showing us that leadership. Actions speak louder
Kick him out. Kick him out.
than words. The US or President Biden only yesterday tweeted that the US supports the right of the Palestinian people to self determination. 2 days before that, the US voted against a resolution on the right of the Palestinian people to self determination. So we don't want to see words, we want to see actions. And the hypocrisy of the US is quite flagrant.
He's in the U.S. He's a United States resident, and he's calling everyone hypocritical. I don't think he has a right to do that. I think it's extremely rude.
You know, principled leadership and true leadership is about the consistent application of international law.
He doesn't know shit about true leadership.
The principled application of international law on your foes and your allies alike. Hypocrisy, double standard.
You notice he said that he is suing, or that he has sued, Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and President Biden, but he doesn't actually show the lawsuit, or he doesn't provide a link to find it.
And selectivity don't reflect characteristics of leadership, but of complicity in genocide. And if you allow me, what's at stake at the moment is not only the dehumanization of the Palestinian people and the genocide that they're facing, but also the whole body of international law is being put to test. Because basically, we saw how the West, and led by the US, mobilized this body of international law in the case of Ukraine. But in the case of Gaza, they're preventing or failing to do the bare minimum, which is called for a ceasefire. So I think what's also at stake is the credibility and the reputation of the U.S., which always portrays itself as a beacon of democracy, but in fact is showing us that it supports.
What do you mean, the reputation of the U.S.? The reputation of the United States is in tatters. It's been shredded. Especially because of President Biden. I mean, I don't know who these guys thought that they were voting for, but everybody knew that something bad was going to break out, and that these third world countries, as well as some of these second world countries like Ukraine / first world, with Russia going in and taking advantage of a weak U.S. president. Everybody could see this coming from a million miles away. So, the reputation of the U.S. will never be the same. It's very, very far from its peak. And it's people like this who get on TV. They don't acknowledge what Hamas has done. They don't talk about how lucky they are to be in this country right now, where they could easily be in Palestine or the West Bank or something, dealing with some of the horrible, horrible side effects of this war. And I haven't met anybody who is full on 100% saying that everything that Israel is doing and the U.S. support of Israel is fantastic. Not even some of the Jews that I've spoken with. So people have acknowledged that whatever is going on there is really, really bad.
genocide. And what's also, I think, interesting in this situation, that it's also putting all of these quote unquote liberal democracies to test, because all polls shows that most Americans want the ceasefire, most Democrats in Congress want the ceasefire, but there seems to be a disconnect between what the people want and what the U.S. leadership is doing. So we call on Biden and the Biden administration to listen to their people, and do the bare minimum, which is calling for a ceasefire.
Ahmed, I want to thank you.
Biden, that's the last thing he's going to do. He's not there to listen to the people of the United States. He's there to effectuate a tyrannical regime.
Thank you so much for being with us, and also our condolences on the death of so many members of your family in Gaza.
Well, so here's the other thing. Assuming that's true, and how unfortunate and unbearable that is, and I am assuming it's true, but we also don't have any sort of proof whatsoever. They can say whatever they want on these shows, especially if you're a self-identified Gazan. Yet there's been so many contravening statements, doublespeak, even just in this interview where they say that he's a refugee to Gaza, but he was Gaza born. So you just don't know what's up. You don't know what's down. And so it doesn't impact me personally to assume that whatever is being said here is true. But on the other hand, they can get away with saying anything they want. I mean, 60 to 120, no one would bat an eyelash, because they make statements that in this context you can't challenge. Because if you were to challenge him on those statements or those facts, and I hate to even call them facts because you don't know if they're true, but let's say that they are, he would accuse you of being all sorts of things. So they wrap it in this sort of like protective shell where you can't actually challenge the statement.
Ahmed Abou-Foul is Legal Research and Advocacy Officer at the Palestinian human rights group Al-Haq. We'll link to your piece. We're witnessing a genocide unfolding in Gaza.
Okay,
To stop.
So let's look at that link. Okay, I'm not seeing it. It's a YouTube video, but yep, not giving it. All I see is Democracy Now! Wanting your money, of course. So the motivation behind this, I guess, is to solicit funds for Democracy Now! And that's another reason why they can get away with saying anything they want, because the more egregious the statement is, potentially the more donations that they could obtain from viewers of Democracy Now! Anyways, I hate to be someone who constantly seems pessimistic, and I'm not trying to be or negative, but it's hard for me to believe a lot of this stuff. And it's always been this way, especially with media in general. And Democracy Now! Is kind of alternative media, but it's also still mainstream media. It's been around for a long, long time. It's very liberal. So you just never know what's true and what's not true. I think, if anything, this does bring more awareness to the issues, especially regarding the innocence of some of the people there that are caught in the middle, which is of course horrible. Yeah. All right. I'll shut the stream down right now. Let me just check to see one thing. All right. I'll be back later tonight. I'll find another video, or we'll go through some comments on a Twitter post or something, and we'll talk about it. Okay. Take care. Bye.
Thanks for watching Command HQ with Brooke and Agent X. We'll see you next time.